Okay, so internet, we meet again. And this week we are going to talk about a little book called 21 Lessons of the 21st Century. I'm sure many of you have heard about this book, or if not this book, you've definitely heard about Sapiens. So Yuval, as an author, he's written a series of 3 books, one on the past, one on the future, and one on the present. And this 21 Lessons of the 21st Century is the latest book, and it's about the present. As usual, I'm not going to explain basically everything from the book. I'm just going to share some ideas I thought were interesting and some thoughts that I had. The book title is a little deceiving. I feel like the title should probably be like the 21 Questions of a Terrifying Future or something like that, because there was really not many lessons. There's just a lot of really deep philosophical questions that we need to ask ourselves when going through what we're going through. And a lot of the questions stem from kind of like a holy trinity, like 3 big hairy problems that he's concerned with in this book. One is nuclear war, the next one is ecological collapse from climate change, and then the third is technological disruption, mainly specifically on AI and BioTech. And of the 3, he's actually most concerned with technological disruption, just due to the fact that it's the most mysterious. We know the most, a little about it, and also a lot of it's being developed kind of in closed doors and not open to society and to people kind of being able to watch and regulate. So if you're interested, go to the post. I am quite proud of this post. I'm pretty happy with it. You should go check it out. There's a lot of links, interesting things that I've mentioned in there that I'm not going to mention here. But here I want to really mention 2 or 3 things. So the first is this concept of the useless class. And this is something, I'm not sure if he coined it, but he definitely popularized it. Where basically he talks about currently there's a socioeconomic gap between certain parts of society. So there's the really wealthy, and then there's the really poor, and there's also the middle ground. And if you look at today, I think it's 1% of the wealth within the world. It's like 1%, 1% of the population makes up 50% of the wealth. And then another crazy statistic that he riffed off was the top 100 wealthiest people in the world hold as much as the bottom 4 billion, which is completely mind-blowing. And in this book, he actually talks about how that gap is going to astronomically increase over time. And it's going to actually narrow down and alter in different ways, in the sense that, so traditionally, we have the labor force, and then we have the people that invest the capital into the companies to make those companies work. And the labor force provides their time, their skill sets to produce things and services and make money for companies, etc. And those individuals we previously were able to transition from one kind of low skill labor job to another. And that was from kind of farms to factories. But he goes on in the book talking about how the more that we automate through machine learning, the higher up the kind of intellectual stack we go, or the skill set needed for the job. And that's further and further getting automated over time. When that happens, more and more jobs become obsolete. So in a world, say, if there are no jobs left, so this is the whole job conversation around universal basic income. When we're out of jobs, then what does the workforce do? Well, practically speaking, we can give them universal basic income, tax the really rich and the big companies, and give that money to the individuals that need it. That's one practical thing, but the deeper underlying question that he asks here is more psychological. So our collective consciousness within society, we tend to derive our meaning from our work, and we tend to identify to our careers the tasks and activities that we do. And without work, and without being able to identify with something, then there's going to be there could potentially be a big psychological burden put on a lot of humanity. So it's figuring out, how do we transition from a world that strictly identifies and derives value from work and providing monetary value and being, a good cog in this massive capitalistic wheel that we run in this ecosystem, to kind of serve others. And the interesting thing actually about this useless class concept is I watched a few, probably like 10 or 12 different talks that he gave in relation to the book while reading the book. And the majority of the Q&As, I'd say 50% of the Q&As were in relation to this useless class concept, because a lot of people tend to be quite concerned of losing not just the money that comes with the work, but also the identity that comes with it as well. Which kind of leads me to the next point that I want to talk about in the book, where he there's a natural question that leads from this question around losing work, and a lot of people ask this in the Q&As as well, is that if a lot of the jobs are being automated away, then what skills should I learn, retrain on, and train my children in for the future of work? What skills are relevant? And traditionally, most people would probably default to STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But he actually takes a different viewpoint on this, that if we're unable to kind of predict what the future skill sets are needed are, then we should focus on the only thing that we can predict, which is change. And he kind of goes on this rant, assuming that maybe in the next workforce, so the next couple of years, things will start to evolve rapidly, and every 5 to 10 years we'll have to shift our careers. And if you know it all, from shifting a career is hard intellectually, but I don't think it's as hard as emotionally and psychologically. So the skill set he says that you need to have in the 21st century is having an emotional and psychological stability. And he talks about it in the sense of being able to detach yourself from one career and attach yourself to a new career. And to do that emotionally and psychologically is really hard. Learning the skills is hard, but it's not as hard as I think it's this. And there's an analogy that he brings up which is quite interesting, and is that traditionally in our careers, we've been taught to build our careers kind of like a home, like a really sturdy home, where you have a strong foundation that's deeply rooted in the ground, and you're kind of building on top of that for your career. But in a sense, he actually says that we should instead actually have tents instead of homes for our careers, so we can pick it up quickly and move quickly when needed. So we're no longer being so attached to a specific career and activity or craft, but instead we're more stable in our kind of psychological mindset. And for me personally, when it comes to going through this experience, I'm actually going through this experience of transitioning. And what's helped me most is journaling, and in the sense of telling stories, because the entire world is just full of stories, and that's all we are, is just fictional stories that we tell ourselves or tell others. And when going through this writing process, I actually start to construct conscious, positive stories in my transition from one career to the next, instead of subconsciously letting myself tell myself negative stories and doubting things, which most people do. And last, I want to touch on just two interesting kind of miscellaneous things that he kind of spoke through in his Q&As and his interviews. It wasn't necessarily in the book, but there were still interesting ideas that I wanted to share with you, and there's more in the post, but the two I want to list here are his reading habits and how he approaches books, and also perspective flipping. So when choosing books, he's open to basically anything. Like, no book is off limits. But the interesting thing is that he actually starts many books. So he'll start maybe 10 books, but after starting 10 books, he'll drop 9 after the first 10 pages. So he'll read 10 pages into a book, and if it's not interesting, not exciting, not useful, and nothing catches him off guard, then he drops it immediately and moves on to the next one. And after I think 100 pages, he actually revisits the book once again and asks himself the similar questions. And if it's not met his expectations, he drops it and moves to the next. So this kind of mentality around starting many books and stopping many books is something that I would actually like to approach in my own life, because I know myself and many of my friends and family tend to read books as a badge of honor, and they want to kind of push through it and say yeah, I finished that book kind of thing. And I like this mentality. The other thing is perspective flipping. So in this, there's an interview he does with James Altucher, and they talk about specifically an example in Sapiens, where he talks about the agricultural revolution. And in the agricultural revolution, most people look at it in the traditional kind of humans perspective, where humans actually domesticated agriculture, but instead he takes the perspective of wheat specifically. So he says that wheat has actually domesticated humans instead of humans domesticating wheat. And he talks about that in the sense that we used to be hunters and gatherers, so we had heightened senses for sight and for hearing and for movement, and the ability to do certain things of spotting different berries, etc. So we've lost a lot of those skills and we've gained new ones, but in a sense we've also become domesticated to certain areas and limited our ability to kind of expand out into the world as nomads. So this ability to build this muscle and to see things from an alternative perspective than what most people see is something I think is quite interesting, and he does often in a lot of his books, and it's a muscle I'd like to maybe start building myself. And with all that being said, that's it. I'm going to keep this one short. If you're interested, I have a newsletter. There's all kinds of entertaining stuff in there. It's on a weekly basis. Usually it's not related to the book. It's just random stuff I come across that's interesting and I find fascinating and might be useful for other people. And yeah, Internet, see you next week.